back to the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. For those newly joining the program, my name is Irina Zuckerman, and I am the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. And tonight we have with us Howard Tobochnik. He is from Tel Aviv University, and he is doing research on ESG, and he's also very much involved with the startup scene and collaborations between Israel and India in tech and innovation. It's an interesting topic because most of what we know about Israel and India consists of defense contracts and basically weapons sales, but there is a lot more dimensions to that relationship emerging as both countries are growing and becoming increasingly more influential globally. And we'll find out what opportunities lie there from Howard today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Before we delve into this topic, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, what exactly you do in terms of research, and how you got involved in this area?
Yeah, so I'm originally from the United States. I grew up there, went to college there, but I started an interest in Asia, in the whole region, when I was young. The first place I went outside the US was to Vietnam by myself. And this was a time when, Vietnam in the cities was rapidly evolved and growing and innovating, but still in the countryside. Maybe it still is today. I haven't been back. But then I spent a few years living in Japan. And again, when I am in Asia, I really see the future and the tech and all of what's going on there really, really inspires me. And then I moved to Israel about 6 years ago. And Israel is known as Startup Nation. There's an amazing ecosystem there, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And I was involved a little bit in different areas in Israel, in the army, the military, in the universities, in private high-tech company. So I saw a little bit of all these different aspects of the high-tech innovation and what Israel is really known for around the world. And then a few years ago, when I did a degree at Tel Aviv University in public policy, I started working with a professor who specializes in sustainable development, and particularly connecting Israeli technologies in energy, agriculture, and water with the developing countries, particularly India. So that was my first introduction to India. And when I went to Bangalore, which is kind of the Silicon Valley of India, I really, my passion and interest was sparked mostly because of interpersonal relations that I made, individual people. And since then, I've been researching it. I work with an Israeli think tank, looking at some of the India-Israel relations, affairs, also at the university, I work on two different research groups, one in sustainable development and one in sustainable finance. They're not specifically focused on, let's say, Israel or India, but these are two big players in a lot of the research and the talk that we're doing. So yeah, that's a brief background.
So as we talk more about these important relationships, we'll obviously delve more into the specifics of all these fields. But I wanted to ask you, kind of setting up the stage for the conversation. We hear a lot about Abraham Accords. They're exciting Israel developing relations and normalizing with Arab and Muslim majority states is a major diplomatic breakthrough, but these relationships with Asian countries are also both sensitive and important. Israel has had diplomatic relations with India, with Japan, other countries for a while, but we hear relatively little outside some of the, again, weapons deals, maybe cyber deals once in a while. Why is that? Why have these important powerhouses of the economy and the political scenes have taken such a backseat in terms of public understanding of these relations?
I mean, from where I stand, I feel like these days all I'm seeing is news and new initiatives about Israel, India, Israel, Japan, but maybe these are very specific to certain tech sectors. The relations aren't that old. Official diplomatic relations between India and Israel began in 1992, right? So we just celebrated 30 years. And it started out fairly modest. Like you said, defense, that did not start in 1992. Even before there were official diplomatic relations, Israel was sending weapons to India and helping them with various aspects of their defense, including counterterrorism and their in particularly the trust between the two countries was kind of built under undercover. It wasn't public news like you said, but Israel helped India a few times with their wars against China, against Pakistan, and particularly in 1999, when the U.S. was boycotting India due to their nuclear weapons, tests and whatnot. Israel continued to supply weapons to India. So, like you said, that is the kind of the bedrock of this relationship. We say that the historically the relations between India and Israel have been based on the 3 Ds, right? Defense, diamonds, and drip irrigation, right? So diamonds includes all precious metals, and actually makes up about a third of the bilateral trade, which is a lot, right? It's at 7 billion or something, and a third of that is diamonds and precious metals. And drip irrigation, this is really the one that I'm excited most about, not only because I work in that field a little bit at the university, but this is something that Israel is known for around the world, is its agriculture and water technologies. And we've been working with India a lot, setting up various centers of excellence around India that focus on training, like skill training for Indian farmers, various technology transfers. I think I'll go into that more because that is a big area.
Please do. It's very exciting, actually.
And that's what I think for Israel, that's also a model that can be replicated with other countries, because water is an issue that, water scarcity, water security, food scarcity, food security, these are issues that so many countries around the world, not only developing countries, but other countries also are worrying about, now that everything's so interconnected globally, the supply chains, and COVID and other wars like the war in Ukraine have showed us that you can't always depend on the way things are going right now. And this is another thing I think we'll talk about, which is self-sufficiency, which Israel has been forced to do. It's in a sense an island, and India has been pushing to become more self-sufficient, both its military and its food security, energy security. Also, that's a big one. We'll talk about so many things to talk about.
I love it. I love it.
It's growing. I think in every area, if you just look at the numbers, it's growing. The question is always, are you maximizing the relationship? Are you maximizing what it could be? The answer is usually no. But I think compared to many other bilateral relations, this one is quite strong. There are some worrying aspects, some things that we should take note of, but the future is quite bright and optimistic.
I mean, India is also a place where many young Israelis go after their service before they go into universities or start their jobs. And I guess there's a lot of opportunity to just basically forge personal relations aside from any formal, government backed agreements.
Yeah, so I that is an important one that sometimes is overlooked, is interpersonal relations, especially when you want to form official diplomatic relations between countries. It's not just all on paper, like what can we work out, like machines and lawyers and whatnot. It depends on trust. Do the people trust each other? Do they understand each other? And diplomacy is something that I'm fairly, let's say, new to Israel. I've only lived there for 6 years. Of course, I've followed Israeli affairs longer. But this is something that has been criticized, that Israel doesn't do enough in its political, let's say, diplomacy with other countries. It's not as strong in that as it should be, and that may have hurt relations. But to make up for that is that Israel has these niches, right? Certain things that they're really, really, really good at: innovation, agriculture, defense, or specific things within defense. But back to your point, the interpersonal relations, we've seen the two prime ministers, Modi and Benjamin Netanyahu, they seem to really like each other. It's impossible to really tell what their true feelings are, but they seem to be somewhat similar and have really good relations. So people point to that as pushing forward the relationship. Like you said, lots of Israelis go to India after the army for traveling. So, I mean, a lot of young Israelis know India, and a different side of India. They know Manali and Rishikesh and these kind of touristy spiritual areas. But it's something. Another thing is that there's not insignificant Jewish Indian population, right? So in Israel, there's something like 80,000 Indian Jews. There were a few different communities in India. Some are left. I think in the greater Mumbai area, there's still about 5,000. In Cochin in Kerala, there's a small, but it's got a lot of the history, a few synagogues. And I honestly, I don't know how much the Indians know about this. All Israelis know about these different populations of Jews that came from Ethiopia, that came from India, that came from other areas. But that really helps with I think that really helps with the relations, because you have these ties that are deeper than just a business deal, right? You have some real interpersonal connections.
So you mentioned about the importance of this agricultural bridge building as a way to kind of both forge business ties, but also it creates goodwill. And there's been some, India has tried has pushed very aggressively to modernize its water access to the general population. My understanding is they're also facing some issues due to the combination of the pandemic and also the war in Ukraine and the wheat crisis. And I'm curious, how has that impacted, first of all, the economic situation there, and second, what opportunity or challenges has it created for Israel in terms of the kind of trying to push more business and more involvement in those areas?
Yeah. So again, this is the second area. In addition, this is the other D, that there's very close and deep and long standing ties. Israel has been working in the agriculture and water sectors for long before 1992, for many decades. We have something called the Mashav. It's through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Israel. It's the agency for international development cooperation, and they have got many centers in India where they, like I said, they do various training, and they also do other kinds of programs, and also bring people from abroad, right, from not just India, to Israel to work and train and learn some of the know-hows. Of course, drip irrigation is a technology that it was invented in Israel and has spread in India. It's still not used as widely as it should be, but it's helping. And so that's the history. Now today, like you said, there's still much concern over clean water and agriculture, food production, sustainability. And one thing one thing to remember, anything we talk about in India, when we just say India is huge, right? And there's huge disparities between different areas. There's states in India where the almost everyone is literate, and there's other ones where it's surprisingly low, you know. And the same goes for agriculture, water, and all of those areas. There's certain areas in India that are extremely productive, where there's lots of they're switching to cash crops, right, rather than just being smallholder farmers. They've got lots of support from, let's say, the state, and they take advantage of the national policies. And there's other areas where they're still flooding the fields, or don't even have irrigation systems, and that overusing fertilizers, and other issues that are pretty simple, like low-tech fixes that just people are people, and they are used to doing things the way they used to do it, and they continue to do it. So I think that's just an important point, and that applies to anything we're talking about in India. People speak the different languages, different religions, they're in different climates. So different areas are affected much differently depending on what the challenge is. Currently, I'm pretty optimistic again in India. When I go there, I see things moving. I see things happening. There's a lot of government support, right? I mean, they joke in India that elections are won or lost on the price of like wheat, rice. Farmers are a big deal there. They have a lot of political power. Now they make up half the population is people who rely on some degree on farming, is half the population, and that's actually been a criticism on why everyone's comparing India to China these days, about now India is the largest country by population. Will it catch up or overtake China in terms of world power? And one of the criticisms is that it's too focused. There's too much in agriculture. There's not enough manufacturing. The reply to that is that, of course, India is not going to be the next China. It's going to be the next India, just like China didn't copy the US in how it grew. India also will have its own model. And one exciting thing in India is all the high tech and innovation, hubs and these kind of companies. So I don't know if I really answered your question exactly, but there's a lot going on. We have Israel has a water attaché, an agriculture attaché in India, and I recommend people look these people up, because they're constantly doing events and putting on various programs. There's a few initiatives we'll talk about. Some are more like political ones, like international relations, and some are just between India and Israel to promote tech and innovation. And always the focus, or at least one of the main sectors that they focus on, is agriculture and water and energy. And these three things are very connected. We see a lot of government programs in India. The government of India subsidizes a lot of programs. They have money, and they want to use it in a way that rises the standards of living as much as possible. But it's not always clear how these should be best used. So the government, for example, has been criticized of the policies towards giving subsidies, too many subsidies, that people just rely on it, and it doesn't actually lead to a consistent increase, like not just linear, but a real increase in standard of living. That's to be debated. But if you look at the number of canals that have been built in India over 50 years, if you look at, the types of new crops, new seed varieties, these are part of the green revolution there. They've really come a far way in the past 50 years. And this is actually one of the areas that at Tel Aviv University, I'm part of a lab that focuses on this. So it's the Nitzan Lab for Sustainable Development, and the goal is really to carry out the academic research, right? That middle piece in looking at how Israeli technologies fit into India and can be used for maximum benefit, right? And what we see a lot is obviously Israel is very high tech. If you go to farms in India, I mean Israel, they're fairly high tech, some of the best in the world. But it's not always, technology adoption is an interesting area of study. It's not always as easy as just sharing this piece of technology and then you get the same results in a different country. And a lot of that comes down to the human factor, that the people are different and they behave differently. They've got different standards of living, and that affects how they adopt the technology and whether it works the same way. So we do research on these programs to see how effective they are, what are the challenges, how much should the government subsidize them, is it worth it? So those kind of things. And there's lots of areas that you probably haven't even heard of. So I'll just throw out one because it's kind of
please
a funny example is Israel actually has, I'm curious if your listeners know this, Israel has the most productive cows in the world in terms of producing milk. Like per cow, they produce more milk than any other cows in the world. And Israel's very proud of this. And there are partnerships I know of one in particular in Gujarat in India, where an Israeli kibbutz, which is this collective, at one time it was completely socialist collective farming, that they have these know-hows and technologies and things to really maximize the milking of cows. And in Gujarat, they were working with the organizations there to implement some of these things in India to just maximize the output. So that's one example of something that I'm sure most people did not know of, but it's been going strong for many years. And those are the kind of things that we want to encourage and promote for both for Israel and India. It's kind of a mutually beneficial thing.
Well, I think that is very interesting. I certainly have not heard of it. I'm sure many people haven't either, and I think it's great. By the way, you mentioned China and the comparisons to China. People forget that China used to be and still is a very agricultural society, and it didn't really open up to the industrialization until the US literally came in there and started pushing it. And actually, that's a criticism of the US policy today, that it created the situation it can no longer control. And a lot of the industry in China is very heavily interdependent, specifically with the US economically, but also with a lot of the industrialization that beyond basic blue collar manufacturing is very much reliant on US know-how, technology, and intellectual property to the degree that is probably not helpful to China itself in developing its own innovation. So in fact, if India can avoid that path, it's probably going to be a healthy journey for it, even if it takes longer. If it develops its own know-how, if it attracts diverse investors to sector, and if it creates a balance that allows it to create jobs in different sectors in a balanced way, as opposed to China that's facing high level unemployment, then it will probably do better. If it's kind of more of a natural rise as opposed to kind of one country dependency that pushes all that stuff, and where you basically have to steal ideas and in order to get along, then it's probably going to do better economically in the long run.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah, India has a lot of these advantages. I mean, Israel, a lot of the innovation and tech in Israel has been born out of necessity, right? The saying necessity is the mother of innovation or whatever. The reason that Israel, I've been talking about the defense and agriculture, is because those are two things that very quickly Israel needed for survival. These were existential threats. Israel had, when it went to war right when it was founded as a country in 1948 with the neighboring Arab countries, and over the years it's had to develop technologies to protect itself. And also irrigation, water. This is one of the most amazing successes in Israel. I always recommend the book by Seth Siegel called "Let There Be Water." He kind of chronicles Israel's journey in becoming the kind of country it is today. And it's not just a few technologies; it's a whole plethora of different policies, cultural things, national infrastructure projects, and on and on, and of course technology. And so like Israel is way ahead of other countries in things such as wastewater recycling, right? Israel recycles something like 85 or 90% of its wastewater, which is then like sewage, which is then reused for agriculture. And now desalinization is a huge one that requires energy. Israel is using natural gas that recently found in the Mediterranean, but also the energy, solar energy, of course. It's still quite small. That's one thing that I still haven't figured out is why Israel isn't doing more. I mean, it is, but not as much as I think
It's expensive. Solar technologies are expensive. I think people don't realize that they rely very heavily. First of all, they're very much climate linked. So not all climates accommodate it similarly. And second, they're expensive in terms of the underlying processes, and they are dependent on fossil fuels nevertheless. So it's still a process, and it's not that
Yeah,
easy, and it's not that efficient comparatively.
yeah.
It's
I will say there's something like
yeah.
200 Israeli companies working in energy tech. There's 8.5 around 9 million people in Israel. So yeah, there's a lot of companies working on different aspects in energy storage also as an issue. If anyone's interested in Israel, there's really good information about the innovation here by the NGO or nonprofit. Is it NGO? Yeah, but support from the government called Startup Nation Central.
Oh,
It's a
interesting.
great resource, and you can actually search for every startup in Israel. You can search for it, it gives a
Wow.
description of it and a link. It also talks about various like venture capital funding, different accelerators, other programs. And India actually has a similar one, a little different, called I Create, like a little I and Create. It's a similar kind of thing that promotes these kind of innovation in these countries. But this is something that actually really interests me, and my first visit to India when I was in Bangalore, this was the kind of thing that really interested me, was why why some countries have this, and you talk about China, but why some countries excel in innovation and are able to create a whole ecosystem. And I think we've realized that there's no recipe, but there's a lot of different pieces that are essential or very important. And Israel seems to have almost all of them. India also has many, not quite as many, but India has other advantages, such as huge population and a huge amount of diversity, and a different culture that's also similar but different than Israel in terms of this entrepreneurial spirit and whatnot. So
Yeah, that's something I'm very curious about, because a lot of Asian countries are known for hard work, for discipline, for, dedication and just a very structural environment, but not all of that is necessarily conducive to kind of a can-do attitude of experimentation and failure, and essentially redoing everything from scratch. That, especially if a country is developing, that is difficult to do, and yet in India that seems to be happening. So can you talk about the factors that are making it possible? What made it possible in Israel? What's making it possible in India? And how can you kind of work together to kind of streamline this natural thing into something that can be actually cultivated?
yeah, you're right about that. I mean, like, I spent a few years in Japan, and I speak Japanese, and I'm very close to the Japanese. And what you described is exactly right. And when we talk about Israel-Japan relations, we often say that Israel is very good at 0 to 1, and Japan's good at 1 to 100, right? So they look at the car industries as what they were able to do, and other tech industries. And you've got South Korea, Taiwan, which have their own flavor of that. But India is a very, very different place. And again, India is a huge country. It's more like a continent. Each state has, different language, hundreds of languages, religions, all different people. And this they say diversity is helpful for innovation. So I'm assuming this is one thing that Israel and India have in common is diverse population, right? Israel's diverse population is immigrants mostly. People over the past 100 years have immigrated. Jews have immigrated here from all over the world, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, obviously the US, which has the largest Jewish population outside of Israel, the Middle East, Iraq, Iran, Yemen, all over. Anyways, there's a lot of diversity. So that's one thing that maybe has contributed. Some of it's just like I said before, a cultural thing of innovation. I always there's Israel's prime minister, not the current one, but in the past, Shimon Peres. He's quoted. He has some great quotes, and he once said that something like the Jews' greatest contribution to the world is dissatisfaction, right? And you'll see like this
This sounds very
dissatisfaction
familiar.
that's not good enough. This should be like, why do I have to wait? Why do I have to and that's kind of the driving thing that pushes Israelis. And I'll teach you a Hebrew word which is chutzpah, right? And chutzpah is kind of like Israelis don't just wait. Okay, like they push, and they're very open and direct and frank about things, and they're willing to take risks. They have this chutzpah, this confidence, right? So that's in Israel, and I saw that also in India. Now, not everywhere. I mean, you'll go to a lot of rural areas, and it feels very slow and kind of dead. Nothing's happening there. There's very little economy, and people aren't working that much. There is unemployment. So there are areas like that. But when you're in other areas, which is some of the major, let's say hotspots of tech and business and innovation in Israel, in India, Bangalore is the most well-known one. Hyderabad is a great city. It's definitely growing. There's other ones like Chennai, and of course Delhi and Mumbai, and all over actually. But when you go to these areas, there really is an energy, and you feel it, similar to Tel Aviv, and Jerusalem and other areas in Israel. But okay, so those are some of the cultural things. One important thing is you need the right people, right? And you need people who are educated, who have the right kind of education in the right fields. So in Israel, the military is one thing that has been noted to contribute to this. Israel has elite intelligence unit 8200. A lot of the boom in cyber, right? Actually, next week or in 2 weeks is Cyber Week at Tel Aviv University. It's many days long, and it's about tons of participants. So if anyone wants to join that, it's free. It'll be all online. But that's one area that it's a pretty clear link between what Israelis were doing in the military, in the intelligence unit, and then afterwards ended up founding tech companies based on that. And in India, the university systems are very good, at least the top universities. So they've got the IITs and the IIS and IIM, so India Institute of Technology, Management, Sciences, and these are very good institutions. And a lot of the engineers that come out of that, come out of India come from these institutions. And so there's so I think it started with engineers in IT. That's what India used to be known for. So again, like Israel, with starting with military things, then moving into other areas. India, I think it started mostly in IT, and there's lots of engineers coming out of these good institutions. But India is so big that they don't have to just stick to one or two things. They can expand to many sectors, and I think that's what's been happening. And the last thing you need is funding, right? Now the Indian government has more money. So it is funding more projects, funding more incubators, things to just help startups. And then you also have venture capital, which comes from being known, so Israel is very well known. It gets more venture capital per capita than any other country. And also the government spends more on R&D than any other country per capita in Israel. And so India is ramping that up also. So you've got the government support. And I'm probably missing a few other factors that are important. But there's no recipe again. So you should probably copy what the best are doing, right? Which countries are the best, copy some of the things they're doing, but you can't really copy because India has 1.3 billion people. Israel has 9 million people. It's a very different country, very different culture. Yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned that there is a disparity between different areas. Could you talk a little bit more in depth about that? Because I think many of our in the audience are not necessarily familiar with India's geography, its diversity, and would be curious to discuss which areas, which not just to stereotype everything as one country. It's more like many countries in one.
Yeah. So India has basically everything. If you go there, you will see that you really have to go there to feel it, because it really has everything. And the main cities people know, Delhi, Mumbai, I guess Bangalore, and there's some touristy areas that are well known, right? Like Leh up in the north, where the Dalai Lama was. When I was there, the Dalai Lama was there. There's a big Tibetan population, Tibetan and Nepali population from Nepal. So you're up there and you feel like you're in Nepal or Tibet. I mean, it's India, but it's got that feeling. Up there also you've got the region of Kashmir. So this is on the border with Pakistan, and this is that very controversial, volatile area. Large Muslim population. If you don't know the history of the partition, but from India and Pakistan, that's something that you have to understand why these things are going on today. Obviously, India was a British colony for a long time, longer than, let's say, Israel, which shortly was ruled by the British. And they partitioned, made Pakistan and they made India, and that's that's in the north, right? Then there's other areas. Obviously, Delhi is the political center of the country. Mumbai is the banking kind of center, as well as Bollywood. Which Bollywood, great way to get a little feel for India. I can give a list of movies that I enjoy, but that's always a good way to get to know a country. You've got also up in the northeast, you've got these states like near Kolkata's the big city up there, but in that area. Also, it's mountainous, and these are very small states, right? Geographically and size-wise. And the population, the people there it's very different from, let's say, South India. And South India, I think, is what a lot of people know, because a lot of the cultures from, at least in the United States, come from South Indians. Also, maybe the cuisine also. So, and this area is also wealthier in southern India. You've got I think from everything from the agriculture to the tourism and to the different manufacturing and other businesses. In the south, it is wealthier. Although Gujarat, which is not in the north, but let's say between like Mumbai and Delhi, that's where Prime Minister Modi is from, and he's put a lot of resources into that state. He was the chief minister of Gujarat, and now he's prime minister. So all over there's different centers of whatever is being, whether it's banking or industry or agriculture, it's really all over. In terms of the disparities in India, I mean, the numbers tell you one thing. I mean, India has more billionaires than any other country except the US and China. So it's not a poor country in that sense. There's a lot of billionaires. One of them, Mr. Adani, just bought the Haifa port for over $1 billion. So that's been in the news a lot, because well, in my personal opinion, this is a sign of a long-term investment, right? Startups are very short-term. You can invest in them, get in and out. You want the exit in a couple of years, right? A few years. But when you buy a port in another country, that really is saying something about the both his prediction for the future and that it's a stable relationship, right? So there are a lot of billionaires, but also you go to India, like you see it on the news, and when you go there's a ton of poverty. There's areas that the slums. And Mumbai is this interesting area, or all the cities, I guess, but Mumbai in particular. I was there recently, and there's this one building. I think banks and some other financial institutions there, and it's the most expensive building in India. And you can like look down across the river to the biggest slum in India. So you've got really this right there, and this you can walk from one to the other. You've got the some of the richest and the poorest. And what I was told, which I thought was interesting, is that the slum is obviously you walk around, it's like a slum. I mean, it's very vibrant. There's lots of trade and other things going on there. But the land that the slums are on is super expensive. So the land is worth a lot of money, and slowly the developers are pushing people out to build new. Mumbai is particularly crowded because it's kind of, if you look at it on a map, it's kind of like crunched into this little peninsula area, so there's nowhere to expand, which jacks up the prices and makes it quite crowded. But yeah, we could give a whole. I'm not an expert in Indian history or other aspects of Indian society in particular, but it's kind of a thing where you just have to go there and feel it. And some people hate it and other people love it. I feel like it really evokes these two extremes. I love it. I love the energy there. I love being on the trains. The food. Just really love it. But I try not to let that influence my views on the relations or how the country will turn out. But it's hard not to when the Indian people I know are very ambitious and doing really good things, and I've been lucky to form very personal relationships with a lot of Indians being there, and so for me personally, I see the potential, based on that. But again, there's a lot of issues also. A few other issues. India has extremely low female participation rates in the workforce, like surprisingly low, like lower than countries that actively discourage women from working in the workforce. Again, you have to be careful with the numbers a little bit because a lot of people work informally, right? But again, the rate of women in the workforce is very low. There are high disparities in the education, so certain areas and certain populations have very low literacy rates compared to and educational attainment in school compared to others. Like I just saw in Gujarat, there's the state test results came out, and there's some schools, there's this grouping of schools that every single student passed, and there's this other grouping of schools that not a single student passed the test. So you see that, and also different populations. So there's the scheduled tribes and the scheduled castes. So the tribes are these Indian tribes that traditionally lived in different forested areas, and the castes, if you know anything about Hinduism and the history, is they're different castes, and they had very strict roles in society. So those two groups are worse off in measures of health and education. They get a lot of support from the government in various forms, but it's still is a disparity there. And yeah, it's again, I'm sure I missed 1,000 useful points in talking about this, but those are a few of them.
And you mentioned that there are some official initiatives and programs that Israel and India have with regards to all this stuff, agriculture and so forth. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Like so just recently, there's been a lot of things happening since 2023 started, right? Which is just less than the last 6 months. There were 3 official visits by Israeli, like the Knesset Speaker Ohana and the Minister of Economy Barkat and the Foreign Affairs Minister Eli Cohen. They all did official visits to India, right? So you've got all these happening. There's this. They signed some MOUs. Where they're still talking about an FTA, like a free trade agreement. This one, I've been trying to find more information about it because it seems like it's been going on for a long time. And I keep reading articles saying it's coming soon, and then it hasn't happened. It hasn't been signed. But so that's hopefully coming. There's an innovation fund called I4F, which is funded by both the Israel and the Indian side. Right, it's the Industrial R&D and Technological Innovation Fund, something like that. So the Innovation Authority on the Israeli side, and this GITA, it's called on the Indian side. And so any joint ventures, right, where there's one Indian company or group and there's one Israeli one working on, again, like I said, the focus sectors: agriculture, water, also energy, healthcare, ICT. So I think it's a $40 million fund, and they fund these kind of R&D ventures, for startups. It can have lots of partners, including academia and some others, but has to be based in business. There's other ones in academia going on, and these are specifically set out. You can apply for them. And probably the biggest one that everyone's talking about is this I2U2, right? India, Israel, the UAE, and the United States. So if we take the United States out of the picture for a second, this trilateral, let's say, agreement or relations between I think you mentioned at the beginning, the Abraham Accords, between India, so that's between Israel and the UAE, but these 3 countries have a lot going on. I really like, there's a writer for the Middle East Institute named Mohammed Salomon, and he has been writing about this. He calls it the Indo-Abrahamic Alliance. It's not an official alliance really, but what I think what these 3 countries see is there's so many areas to work together. And again, we don't have time to go into it, but this is a kind of a phenomenon called kind of middle powers, and focusing on mini-laterals, right? That rather than having official alliances that take a long time and really set in stone, you have to do this, rather to that middle powers, like especially the strong middle powers like the UAE, India, and Israel, should focus on specific areas, right? Where do we have mutual interests? So these 3 countries have some regional geopolitical interests, right? They're on different sides of West Asia, right? The Middle East. India and the UAE already have very close ties, a huge Indian diaspora in the UAE, energy, and other trade also. So I2U2, the US is the the main player, I guess, in it, pushing these things, but a lot of the initiatives are in happening using Israeli technology and UAE funding in India, or some combination of that. Some say it's, you know, a way to counter China, right? China's growing influence in the Middle East. They don't officially, obviously they don't officially say that. It's not a, it's don't, you can't compare it to the Quad or something. It's not a security, it's not an alliance. It's a grouping that's supposed to increase, you know, trade, investment, joint R&D, technology transfers, and these kind of things. Just recently, Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor to Biden, gave a speech, and I thought, and he said, you know, if you remember nothing else from my speech, remember I2U2, because big things are going to happen. So again, this is all talk. Nothing's really happened yet. There's a few projects going on. I'm interested to see if it will live up to the hype. It's impossible to know, but I mean, there are a lot of initiatives that get a lot of hype, and then not much happens necessarily. So we have to see what's really going on here, and if all the countries have strong incentives and interests, then hopefully something will come out of that. So that's I2U2. Let's see, are there any others? I'm trying to think. Yeah, I mean, not in particular. There's all these MOUs being signed between Israel and India also, which again, it's not clear. It's not so easy to measure how much comes out of them, but I think it's a good sign. I hear Netanyahu is supposed to take a trip to India sometime this year. We'll see if that happens. But yeah, these are the main ones I've been hearing about. Other countries, there's a lot of talk also about what other countries to pull into these middle power partnerships. So Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Egypt, even Greece, and some other countries that have, for each issue, right, for each, let's say, sector, or whether it's a strategic geopolitical thing, or whether it's a specific sector like healthcare or whatever, you can kind of form a different grouping that has a common interest and shared interests. So I think this really is an important thing in building really deep relations between countries, is this shared interest and the right timing. That why is it happening now? That's a good question. But just to go back to history, a lot of these countries like India that depended on Arab oil, or had strong close relations with the Arab countries that were not so friendly with Israel, and that was a hindrance to the relations. And today it seems like what's happening is that you can do both. India still buys weapons from Russia. They didn't accept the US's demands to boycott it, and they buy Russian oil, but they still have good relations with the US and other countries. I think in our region the same thing had. There's a block against Israel, right? So we might see that we're talking about Saudi Arabia, what's going to happen with Israel-Saudi Arabia relations. It's a little bit maybe more complicated than the UAE, and now they just signed the agreement with Iran. But again, the people, the analysts who study that seem to claim that it will happen. It's a matter of time. And you can have India. India still has, and I think you wanted to talk about some of the challenges. India has very close relations with Iran, which is Israel's main, threat and worry in the region, in the world. India has very close relations with Iran. It buys energy from Iran. It invests in Iran. both of those things can be true. It's not a black or white thing. Israel is obviously is stuck in the middle of this, let's say, superpower competition, China and Israel. I think you've had other guests talk about that. But again, it's not a black and white thing. I mean, Israel can't sell China certain technologies. The U.S. says no. China's investments in Israeli infrastructure. Also, the U.S. has put pressure on them. So that might actually be helping the Israel-India relations. It's spurring it because Israel can't do it with China in certain sectors. But it's certainly a challenge navigating these different relations with countries that don't have, let's say, full diplomatic relations or have differing, goals and partnerships.
It is curious what happens if Iran continues growing closer to China and whether it will impact its relationship with India. But for now, even without those geopolitical considerations, it looks like India is taking steps to become more energy independent regardless. One of the issues that I wanted to bring up is India's competition with China in renewables, in green energy, and it has been looking to become a global provider of nuclear, civilian nuclear technology and energies, and it has developed some unique approaches to that. Well, how is that affecting the energy sector, and what impact does it have on Israel's cooperation and the involvement in renewable technologies?
So I'll admit I don't know so much about India's a nuclear sector and what they're doing there, but you're absolutely right that India wants to be both self-sufficient, right? Self-sufficient in many different areas, avoiding, for security, but not just physical security, but food security, water security, and energy security is a big one. It wants to be self-sufficient, and it has this conflict on its borders with Pakistan and also in China. Now, China and India are huge trade partners with each other. They've got huge trade relations. There's a lot going on there, but there is some competition and they don't like each other, right? They don't like each other. Again, it's hard to know what is more of the rhetoric that's happening just at the political level and what really on the business or trade or people to people relations, how exactly it is. But yeah, you're right that India is pushing this. So one thing that they're doing is a lot of Modi has this Made in India initiative where they're promoting more manufacturing. This is one way of building India as a global power. But also it leads to the self-sufficiency. So a lot of the weapons and other defense sector technology that Israel provides to India, now the Israeli companies like Elbit or whatever are actually helping working with Indian companies such as Adani and these other big conglomerates that do everything to make these weapons and other things in India, right? So that gives India a little bit more of a let's say self-confidence that they don't have to depend on Israel sending weapons, that they can build it on their own using the know-how that Israel provides. I think this is happening in the other sectors as well. But again, this is an area that Israel can take advantage of its expertise. And Israel is a small country, so it can't do everything like a big country like the U.S., which really can be strong in so many different areas. But particularly for example, in the defense sector, it's mostly Israel is very high, like deep technology, drones and other anti-missile things and these kind of technologies. And same in the energy. So solar panels aren't that complex, right? But when you get into some of the other technologies, for example, energy storage, no one's really solved it at a cheap enough price. Storage without using, let's say, batteries, and more sustainable. So again, this is an area that I think it definitely will be a big topic on the agenda coming up. I think Israel should also help really focus on areas that countries want to the security is changing. So the two areas that are kind of exciting also now, or that are really interesting. So one is the whole chip industry, right? The semiconductors. And India is right now trying to set up its own semiconductor fabrication plants. And so this is something that's not going to happen in just a couple of years. But an Israeli company, Tower Semiconductor, I think it was bought by Intel, actually, is one of the companies bidding to get the Indian government's subsidizing, funding, help any companies to do this. So this is part of it. India wants to have more self-sufficiency, and also have this integral this role in the world, that they do something that let's say no one else does, or that they it's a powerful area. Another one is obviously the 5G, 6G, that area also. Again, if being too reliant on China, India, who doesn't have good relations, and obviously the US see these as, let's say, possible security threats. So Israel, which it's not gonna, it doesn't have the capacity to have a semiconductor plant, but it can definitely have certain pieces of the technology that are crucial to these areas, and work with India to supply those, and have a piece in that. I think it's the same in the energy sector, and obviously that's already happening in the defense sector.
So I'm also hearing kind of competing narratives about how India is tackling its efforts to modernize, innovate, and on the one hand, there is this huge news about it's trying to overhaul and digitize its economy, its retail sector, and create this huge online retail ecosystem that would level the playing field for small, mid-sized businesses vis-a-vis huge conglomerates and huge companies like Amazon and Alibaba. On the other hand, I'm hearing horror stories of bureaucracy that takes decades to break through, and that stifles innovation and any efforts at doing business and attracting investors. So how do these two competing narratives add up? What's the true story here?
The true story, probably somewhere in between, right? It is true that the advanced payment systems that they have, and the digital India, this is another kind of a catchphrase, thing that they're pushing, digital India. It's amazing. I mean, I'm always I was in Mumbai last time I was in India. I was in Mumbai. I was at the street market to buy some coconuts or something, vegetables, coconuts. And I'm here fumbling with my rupees, and the guy in front of me, he's got no shoes, he barely has any clothes on, and he's paying with the digital, his digital money. I don't even have Apple Pay on my phone. I haven't even installed it. I have a credit, so I'm like, so it's really interesting. And the kind of, and also the leapfrogging, from one technology to the next. They go from having no electricity to having solar panels, right? These kind of things. Is it stifling innovation? I don't know. I don't know. I think it's too complex of a ecosystem. It's too hard. We'll know, looking back, what hurt or helped. But I think there are a lot of competing interests, and a lot of people live in this kind of informal economy, right? They're not working in a job that's paying and reporting that to the government. So one initiative that India succeeded in was giving each person an ID number, that they actually know who these these people are, who's in the, and that brings kind of the economy to modernize into a modern economy. And I guess I don't really know what the true story is. I think it speaks the ecosystem of innovation and startups and tech companies kind of speak for themselves. There are issues with let's say corruption, doing business with the government. These big conglomerates also have a lot of power. So it's an issue with foreign companies trying to enter India, that they get resistance from these companies that have both the local connections and knowledge, and use that to maintain their position. But again, I'm generally pretty optimistic about India, but it's very, very hard to predict what's going to happen. I think they're in a much better position on the one hand than people would have predicted, particularly the innovation and the high tech, right? But then on other measures, they haven't really improved as much as they seem they should have. So there's certain like health measures that India still is considering their level of development are still scoring very low on. Like anemia levels, for anemia for women, and like stunting. So there's something happening that a lot of that maybe again, you have to be careful about averages because India is so big and there's such variety. But the innovation and the tech certainly is moving forward at a fast pace, and I wouldn't doubt it. But I read a few books by this author Ruchir Sharma. He wrote the book like The Rise and Fall of Nations. Indian guy, and he's got very good articles in the Financial Times also about India. So anyone who's looking to learn about Indian kind of the economy and kind of trends, he's got a line where he says India is a country that consistently disappoints both the optimists and the pessimists. Right? So everyone who's really optimistic about India, they disappointed. And anyone who says, India, it's going to be that, they're also disappointed. It ends up that's just the trend. I think he's kind of he's been right about that. So we've seen a huge maybe an overvaluation of the innovation, the tech and startups. So that's was a lot of excitement, and now it's gone down. It's kind of recalibrated to more realistic, let's say, valuation, and we're not going to go back to the previous, that hype. But on the other hand, big things are happening, and consistently companies, more and more unicorns, billion-dollar private startups, and both in India and around the world. So India also has this huge global diaspora, like the largest in the world, and that connects India with almost every country around the world, and that I think also both for the knowledge exchanges and connections for the companies is also will be helpful for them going forward always.
Well, as far as I see, whatever shortcomings there are gaps to fill, and this is where Israel and others have an opportunity to further expand, past the 3Ds into various other sectors and types of relationships that can help bridge these gaps and kind of encourage internal reforms and so forth. I think this is where this sort of knowledge exchange and relationships really come in handy. So I wanted to ask one last question, and that goes back to the defense and cybersecurity that you mentioned in exchanges. There's a lot going on there, obviously. Israel's cybersecurity cooperation with various countries around the world has become famous and emblematic of its approach to initial stage of relationship building. But we have also seen it come under protracted attacks from various actors and campaigns. And one of the things I'm hearing that India, that has purchased Israel's cybersecurity software, has now been impacted by some of these campaigns to the point that they're actually looking for other alternatives. How can Israel balance this important aspect of its relations, its security cooperation, versus these international attacks looking specifically to kind of break down these types of very important cooperations and security relationships? Precisely because together India and Israel are such a dynamic duo and such a force to reckon with.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. I've also been seeing this in the news. I think the main thing that, and this is the problem with the defense sector, is by definition things have to be can't be always completely public, but there is a lack of transparency, and that's led to some issues like you described. So finding the balance of being transparent and open, and this is also what builds the trust. There's things going on. Again, I'm not an expert on the defense. There's
Sure.
lots of Israelis who work in this area. I'm curious what they would say. But in most of these areas, increasing transparency is only a good thing. And for any industry that's so big, India is Israel's largest export. Israel exports almost half of its defense sector exports go to India, and India buys most of its, I mean, something like 40% of its weapons or whatever come from Russia, but Israel or France is number 2 or 3. So it's a huge sector of $1-2 billion a year. And so if there are a few things that don't work out, or Israel doesn't do so well, that's natural. That will happen. It shouldn't be overlooked. Of course, Israel can work on that. I would have to dig into each case on its own, because I think each one kind of is different. In the cybersecurity, there's these private companies, and also there's it's an interesting dynamic where it's like private companies, but also some government connections, or has to at least have government support or approval to work in certain areas. So I think that's kind of its own topic, and I'm not so much of an expert in that. But India, it's looking to diversify. It doesn't want to be too dependent on Russia. It's explicitly said that it needs to diversify both the countries that it's receiving weapons from, and also the kinds of military technology that it's investing in. Like I said before, it wants to do more at home, built in India. So Israel now is a big player in that. I mean, this has only come in the last, it's a huge increase in the last 10, 20 years, obviously. Israel's a big part of this. But yeah, and again, it's not just these companies in technology. They also are working together on counterterrorism, information sharing, different partnerships like that. So it really is the most multifaceted and deep relationship between these the aspect of the India-Israel relations. So we don't want to see it riddled with scandals or issues, but I think it's maybe the most robust, because the two countries do really depend on each other, and that's a huge export for Israel, and that's allowed Israel to make enough money to continue investing in its own defense sector, and just spiral up and keep growing. And for India, Israel provides very high tech, not the low tech weapons so much, the really high tech specific weapons that it needs for, and they can't really get from anywhere else, or that Israel really has this advantage in. So I didn't really answer your question, but maybe if we do a follow up,
I'll
or
be
you can
happy to
invite
show.
someone a guest who really is an expert in this, because there are some really, the INSS, the Israel National Security, the INSS has a lot of security related publications, and also JISS, which is the Jerusalem one. INSS is at Tel Aviv University, or they're kind of related. I'm not sure exactly how it is now, but they have experts who really have come from this sector and were working on the inside. So I don't know how much they be
I would love to. I would love
share,
to.
but
Yeah, if you could connect me to one of them, I think this is a growing topic. But there's another development that I think is on everyone's minds as much as cyber, which is BRICS and their campaign to develop their own currency and to become kind of, at the very least, diversify the types of currency that has become kind of an exchange basis, a reserve basis from the dollar to yuan and possibly to this new types of currency or currencies. So far, it's very difficult to accomplish, but we have seen a number of countries sign up, and we have also seen India assert its own independence in that context. To what extent do you see Israel aligning with BRICS and those 40 plus countries versus the rest who haven't joined? How do you see that relationship going?
I mean, Israel's closest ally and strategic partner is the United States, and
Mhm.
that period. Like, that's not going to change, at least in the near future. So I think Israel will continue to side with the United States. Um, More and more, it'll able to do these little partnerships with
Mhm.
middle powers. For the most part, the countries that Israel has bad relations with, the U.S. also, or vice versa. So like Iran, both Israel and the U.S. are countering them. Russia is a kind of interesting one. Israel doesn't have great relations, but there are obviously relations. But no, I don't think BRICS. I don't think Israel is will. I mean, I don't know what the choice is, what they'll side with.
I'm not even talking about siding so much as how do you see having in how do you see Israel relating to the group of countries? I'm not saying about
hmm.
siding, but do you see them engaging in any way with that general dynamic, or do you see this kind of becoming more of a, less of a pro-independence dynamic and more of an anti-US dynamic?
Yeah, well, I mean, Israel, their main focus is their region, right? And for good reason. I mean, again, Israel isn't a huge country, a huge power. I mean, obviously in trade, the United States, China, and the EU are the main partners, but a lot of the focus is here on in the region, which is why we talk so much about the Abraham Accords and relations with our neighbors that we have good relations with, Jordan and Egypt, and then West Asia, which kind of is now becoming more and more connected here. Um, I, I don't have a good sense of where Israel will, in terms of what you talked about with the currency with BRICS. I personally don't think much will change at least in the near future. But Israel, one thing that Israel is very good at is adapting to stressful situations, and outside situations. For example, let's say boycotts against Israel,
Mhm.
wars against Israel, etc. Israel has been very successful. Now we're seeing internal threats, right? Huge, just a ridiculous degree of let's say, I mean, hatred between Israeli citizens who are on the other, secular versus ultra orthodox, or the right wing and left wing, liberal conservative. So that made a lot of people more worried than the outside threats, because is Israel very good at bonding, banding together, when there's a threat, whether it's a war or whatever. but it's harder when it comes from within and people have different views on how the country should go. And I mean, you can have a guest also on Israeli politics, which is fascinating and always dynamic and always happening, new things. But I think Israel will be fine. And again, I like I've said a few times, these middle power partnerships, these mini laterals with other like-minded countries. That's one way to not like you said, like it's not about choosing sides. It's about just continuing to push your interests despite a changing international order, because you really can't predict. You can't you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. You don't want to be too dependent. Maybe Israel's overly dependent on the U.S. right now, and that isn't a good thing in the long run. It's hard to know. But for now, I think in the international order, Israel's in a very good position, and its partnerships with India are only make that stronger. Of course, I love India. I'm very optimistic about that, but we'll see. But Israel is also China. Israel has good relations, and those are a lot of benefits to Israel. Again, it needs to be careful. What to safeguard its own interests, to have its own leverage its position in these relations. So against huge countries like the U.S., China, and now increasingly India, that's an important thing to take into account.
Well, that has been the most enlightening conversation. I think very interesting to a lot of people. I think we hear the words Israel, India a lot together in combination, and that's a good thing. But I think we know about it far less, and I think this is a great start to kind of highlighting and enhancing these relations and bringing them more into kind of a hopefully trilateral and multilateral spectrum as well, with having more Americans involved, with having more kind of dynamic all around and international involvement and support, because I think there's a great potential there for a lot of different things, and I'm excited to see what else comes out of these collaborations. Thank you so much for the important work that you do, and I hope we continue this discussion because there'll always be more to say on the subject.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, and we'll be in touch. Thanks for everyone who's been watching the program, the Washington Outsider Report. We'll, as always, be back next week, Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Thank you to everyone who joined, and have a good night.